We are back at it again for another 5, 10, 20 no limit game on the Hamul Poker livestream. In today's episode, we play a nearly $20,000 pot in what is one of the craziest hands of my life, so buckle up for a crazy session of poker. What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another day in the vlog. Today we've got a pretty exciting day. We have a 5, 10, 20 session at Jamul. Match the stack, 3K buy-in. You guys know the drill, a very fun game for us. It's like 11:30 in the morning right now. And what I'm doing right now is I am getting ready for a coaching call with my poker coach. So I will show you guys a little bit of the behind the scenes of this. Hopefully we can learn a bunch of new stuff and become a much better player by the end of this. So I'm very excited. Let's get it.
So you're playing, right, like cold call button 27%. Facing 3.0 defense against the button. This number should be 86. But they really are good at finding these rare kind of solver hands.
All right, so we just met up with Alvin for a quick like 30-45 minute session to kind of tune up some leaks. I've been playing a little bit online, so we were kind of going through the data and then just kind of like where my leaks are in terms of, I guess, from a GTO perspective, kind of looking at my frequencies of things and then just kind of seeing where the leaks were. There's definitely a couple spots where I'm leaking right now, so we're gonna work to sharpen those up. Obviously, I'm not gonna talk exactly explicitly about those leaks right now because I don't wanna just be handing all of my competition my leaks. But yeah, I am gonna be kind of focusing on fixing those over the rest of this month, and then we'll kind of go from there. So yeah, it's like 12 o'clock now. Gonna chill for a little bit and then head over to Jamul to play some 10-20. It's gonna be a good day. Let's go. What a day to be alive. It is Wednesday. It's been a super busy month so far. Excited to get back in there, play some fucking cards today. So for those of you that were kind of wondering what was going on in the coaching session this morning with my poker coach, Alvin Teaches Poker, essentially what we were kind of doing was going through a database of hands that I had played over the past month or two online. It was roughly like 20,000 hands, and basically he was just kind of looking through my data and essentially figuring out what kind of landmarks I'm hitting and what I'm not. So for example, like you're supposed to 3-bet at X percentage from this percentage versus that percentage, or you're supposed to c-bet these types of boards at this percentage. And essentially we're just kind of looking at that, comparing it to what I should be doing, and essentially finding my leaks that way. So there were a couple things that really stood out from the data that we analyzed. So those are just some things that I'm gonna have to clean up over the next month or so, just to make sure those leaks are kind of getting patched for the most part. But that's kind of how our session was. It was more of just like looking holistically at my game. Basically, it's database review, right? We're reviewing my database, making sure things look good, and then figuring out what my leaks are through that database. And then now we're going for some touch up on that. So one of the leaks that was kind of in my game was in the check back line on the flop. So if I open button, big blind defends, and I start off with a check, after he checks it over to me, I'm folding too much versus the turn probe. So when the big blind's kind of leading out, and then I'm also just kind of getting ran over when I'm betting the turn in the delay line. That was like a major leak, and that'll get plugged. And I'm not gonna speak too in depth about my leaks because I know a majority of my competition probably watches all of my vlogs anyway, so it's only gonna hurt me the more I speak on my leaks or whatever. It already kind of hurts me to post all this content through the thought process, but I enjoy it, so I'm doing it. But yeah, I think there's some leaks that I need to patch up. It's good to always have like stuff that you know needs to get worked on. That way you're always kind of like moving and your wheels are spinning when you're playing poker, because yeah, if you think your game's totally good and there's no leaks, you're not going to have those wheels turning. Now I'm going to go into this session thinking about a lot of the leaks that I need to plug, and kind of already starting to apply a lot of the stuff that I learned today into today's session. So shout out Alvin Teaches Poker, one of the best in the game, and happy to be working with him. Jumping right into the first hand of the stream, Evan opens the action up from the cutoff to 60, Peter flats on the button, and I complete from the third blind with 4-5 offsuit. We go three ways to a beautiful flop of 3-4-5 with two hearts. This is a very favorable board for my range, and I will lead this board at some frequency, even multi-way here. I decide to lead out for $60, roughly a third pot. And now Evan, interestingly enough, min raises to 120. Action gets over to Peter, who thinks about it for a really long time, but does end up folding. And when action gets back to me, I think I have a pretty standard call with my particular hand. With the board being so dynamic and the possibility of me already drawing very slim, I don't think putting in another raise with top two is something I want to be doing often at this stack depth. I make the call and we head to the turn, which is a very bad 2 of hearts. We check and flow to Evan, who now bets for 350, just under the size of the pot. Facing this bet, I don't really think I can continue with top two. He is never doing this with a worse hand for value, and while he could have bluffs, most of them just got there on the turn. So I make the fold, and we are going to shake this one off and move on to the next hand. In the next hand to note, George opens in the hijack to 50, and I make a pretty light 3-bet with queen 10 offsuit to 180 in the cutoff. Wiley cold calls from the third blind and George completes. Not an ideal situation to be in with queen 10 offsuit, but worry not, we get bailed out by a beautiful flop of king 10-10 with 2 clubs. When action checks to me, I make a c-bet of 225, Wiley makes a quick call, and George gets out of the way. The turn comes the 9 of hearts, bringing in an open-ended straight draw, but when Wiley checks to me once more, there is no way I am ever checking this back. We still get value from king X, and there are a plethora of draws to get value from here as well. I decide to fire for 750 this time, and Wiley makes the quick fold, and we scoop up a nice pot. A few orbits go by and I am in early position with pocket 5s and raise it up to $50. Evan in the cutoff 3-bets to 175, and when it folds back to me, I make the call. We go heads up to a very interesting flop of 4-6-3 rainbow. I check it over, and now Evan decides to go for a nearly pot-sized bet of 350. I actually really like this sizing from Evan here, as it's very polarizing and immediately narrows his range down to strong overpairs and bluffs. From my perspective, facing this bet, I do think we have a pretty standard call here. I think mixing in some low frequency raises on a board like this with hands like 4-5 suited, 5-6 suited, or even my hand pocket 5s does make sense at this stack depth. Either way, I do decide to just go with the standard option here and make the smooth call. The turn comes the queen of spades, and now we check it over to Evan once more, and he decides to keep his foot on the gas here with another bet to the tune of $1,000. Facing this bet, I think it's relatively close, but I think my hand just has too many possibilities going to the river for me to want to get rid of this one just yet. So after some deliberation, I make the call once again, and we go to the river, which comes the 6 of hearts. And once again, I am just going to check this over to Evan. At this point, I am obviously just hoping to get to showdown here. Evan goes deep into the tank in what I assume to be an attempt to analyze how often I am going to have a 6 in this spot, which I think is really reasonable. From his perspective, I should have most combos of 5-6 suited and 6-7 suited, given both of them have enough equity to continue until the river. Luckily, Evan does decide to eventually check this back after quite a long tank, and unfortunately, we are going to lose to pocket aces in this pot. Nice hand to Evan, and we are going to look to bounce back from this tough hand. Picking the action back up here, Carlos opens to 75 from the low jack, and I look down at pocket 8s on the button. I can go both ways here between calling and 3-betting, but I am going to take the aggressive route this time and 3-bet to 230. Two to my left, Patrick wakes up with a hand that he wants to battle with and puts in the cold 4-bet to 850. Carlos looks like he is in the blender. but eventually does make the fold and action gets over to me. Even though this is a cold 4-bet, we have a pocket pair in position with plenty behind to play for, so I am definitely not going to be going anywhere just yet. I make the call and we go heads up in position to a 4-bet pot. The flop comes queen 10-9 with 2 spades, and Patrick decides to start off with a check here. Good players are going to find checks in 4-bet pots out of position on some board textures, and Patrick certainly fits the bill. I think this is one of those types of boards that does make sense for Patrick to check. So while most players are probably just pure c-bet kings plus here, I think Patrick is going to be quite balanced and definitely check some of those overpairs. That being said, I do think we are far down enough in our range to consider blasting this off. However, I don't find the bet in game and make a pretty lame check back in my opinion. The turn rolls off the 2 of diamonds, and obviously we are just hoping that Patrick wants to show down ace king or the likes of it at this point, but unfortunately he comes out firing for 1200 against this bet. Don't really think we have much of a decision, so I do let this one go this time. In hindsight, I think betting my hand and starting to bluff on the flop makes the most sense, as we don't really have a ton of bluffs on this board considering our pre-flop range. Either way, nice hand to Patrick, who shows ace jack of diamonds. Definitely a pretty savvy play by him here. The $40 straddle is on for this hand, and I make a standard raise to $100 with king queen offsuit in the hijack. Evan makes the call from the small blind, and George makes the call from the straddle. The flop comes 9-3-3 rainbow, and when action checks to me, I decide to go for a larger c-bet this time to the tune of $210. Evan makes the fold, but George makes a very quick call. The turn comes the 8 of diamonds, and given my large c-bet, I assume George's range will just be quite strong on this board. It's mostly going to be hands like top pair or better, and against that range, I am really not interested in continuing to bluff. So I do decide to check this back in hopes to drill a king or queen on the river. Lucky for us, the river comes the queen of clubs, giving us top pair, and George checks once again. And as I mentioned before, I think George has a relatively strong range here, consisting of a lot of 9x type holdings. So after some deliberation, I decide to throw out $725, just under the size of the pot. George takes no time before making the call and tables pocket jacks, which are no good versus my rivered queen. We are going to scoop up this $2,200 pot after a pretty brutal suck out versus my opponent's premium. Just a few hands later, we get involved again in a pretty spicy way. The $40 straddle is on and Carlos limps in the cutoff. Danger D calls from the small blind, and that is when I look down at 7 deuce of clubs in the big blind. There's a $25 per player bounty for winning with the 7 deuce, but more importantly, it's about pride here. I raise things up to $300 in hopes to clear out the field, but Carlos is not going to let me off that easy. He makes the call and everyone else gets out of the way. We go heads up to a flop of 10-9-2 rainbow with 1 club, and I decide to c-bet for 150. Carlos makes the call and we see a beautiful 7 of hearts on the turn, giving us 2 pair. I decide to get tricky here and check things over to Carlos, who snap jams for $3,100. With 2 pair, I'm never folding, so I snap him off and we decide to run it 2 times. We're up against the nut flush draw, and the first river comes the 3 of clubs, securing us the first board, but the second river comes the 3 of hearts, so we are going to end up chopping this $7,200 pot here. It's always nice when the trap works, but it is unfortunate our opponent got there on one of the boards. We are in the $40 straddle this time, and Peter gets the action started from the button with a raise to 125. It folds to me and I make the call with my suited garbage, and we head to a flop of 5-4-3 rainbow. This is a board that favors my range a lot. I'm definitely going to be donking on this board at a pretty high clip, and with my specific hand, it seems like a very good candidate to do just that. I lead for 75 here, and Peter makes a quick call in position. The turn comes the 3 of diamonds, and I decide to exercise some pot control here and check this turn card. Action is on Peter now, who thinks for a little bit and decides to bet for 200. With top pair and a straight draw obviously not going anywhere, so I do make the call and we head to the river. The river is a pretty bricky 10 of clubs, and we check and flow to Peter once more. He decides to bet for 600 now, which is obviously putting us into a pretty gross spot. When Peter bets for this size on the river, he is telling the story that he has some type of overpair here or better, and the board really hasn't changed much at all since the flop. When I think about the hand and how things played out, one thing that really stuck with me is how fast he called on the flop. I think if he did have some sort of value hand, I really think he would have at least considered the possibility of raising on the flop versus my small donk bet. When he calls really quickly, I think that range is mostly going to be consistent with ace X type holdings. I think overpairs, sets, two pairs, straights, all the value combos that he would have would at least take a little bit of time to decide whether they wanted to raise or just call. After quite a bit of deliberation on my end, I do decide to flick the call in and are happy to see the good news when he shows ace queen. This just goes to show the little details really do matter when hand reading, and paying attention to things like timing can certainly come in handy in future streets. Buckle up your seatbelts because we are about to play one of the wildest hands I can recall in recent memory. We are shorthanded at this point, and I am in the $40 straddle with ace 10 offsuit. Evan opens to 125 from the small blind, Carlos calls from the third blind, and with our hand, I think it's reasonable to call or 3-bet, but I choose to just come along with a call this time. The flop is beautiful. It comes ace, ace 3 with 2 diamonds. Evan checks, Carlos checks, and when action gets to me, I am obviously going to start value betting here. I decide on a pretty small size of $100. Action is on Evan now, who decides to spring a check raise to 400. Carlos gets out of the way and action gets back over to me, and I really have no decision here. I make the smooth call and we are headed to a turn heads up. The turn comes the 9 of clubs, and Evan does not slow down. He fires once more for 700, a little over half of the pot. Again, I don't really think we have a decision here. I think calling is the only reasonable play, so I toss in some calling chips looking to play a third street of poker. The river comes the jack of spades, which looks relatively harmless. We were already behind ace jack to begin with, if that is what he had, and pocket jacks would never ever play this way. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Evan decides to bet this river for $20. This is literally one big blind, or technically half of one, considering this hand was straddled. And sitting here with trips and a pretty good kicker, I'm not sure how I can just call this bet. Honestly, a $20 block here is basically the same thing as a check considering how big this pot is, and I would certainly be value betting if he had checked it over to me. When he takes this size, I think it's pretty indicative of a bad ace that doesn't really want to get one more large street of value or a river jack. Now, this could also be a trap with full houses to get me to go psycho mode and raise with a ton of bluffs too. We can't let that stop us from going for value in this spot though, and to be honest, there's really no telling what Evan could have here at this point. He's very creative, and I'm sure he's gonna have some weak hands that want to buy a showdown, and also nutted hands that want me to raise. With ace 10, I think I can target weak aces and some river jack X with a medium-sized bet here. So after quite a bit of time, I decide that $1,600 is going to be the price of poker. Upon placing my bet, Evan double checks his cards and goes into a bit of a tank. I'm hoping he has a hand that wants to pay me off here, so I am just sitting there praying to God he makes the call and I can get paid. I'm already thinking about how I'm going to spend Evan's money when he does the unthinkable. Evan announces that he is all in for $7,000. Honestly, this is just unbelievable. While I didn't rule out the possibility of this happening, I am just disgusted that he actually fucking did it. Now, 99% of players are just never bluffing here in a million years. Unfortunately for us, Evan is in the 1% of players that is going to have bluffs here, and this is the exact reason why he's going to be tough to play against. I am just sick to my stomach at this point, trying to think about whether or not I should call or fold, and if my hand even makes sense to call with. There's a lot of things going through my head, and the first thing is, what is the worst hand Evan is ever doing this with for value? I don't really think ace queen or ace king is strong enough to do this with, and I think Evan recognizes this, so I pretty much think he needs a boat here. He never has pocket nines or pocket jacks with the way that this hand played out, so in my head it's basically either pocket threes or aces full. I even think that if Evan had pocket threes, he may not want to play for everything here. I'm really not sure. It seems kind of close. The problem with Evan bluffing here is it's just so fucking easy for me to have the nuts, and whenever that's the case, going for a bluff is just super scary, and people just aren't crazy enough to bluff those types of spots a lot. But like I said before, Evan is a bit of a wild card, and I really think he's capable of finding some of these bluffs on the river. The question is, what can he really bluff with? I think he could be bluffing with a bad ace or a river jack X type hand here. So hands like ace deuce, ace four, ace five all make sense, and hands like jack X of diamonds also make sense as well. That being said, I think it's really good for us to have an ace in our hand to bluff catch with, considering he is basically just going to be doing this when he has aces full for the most part when he has value. And on top of that, the 10 of hearts is quite good because it doesn't really interact at all with any of his bluffing combos. If I had ace 10 with the 10 of diamonds, that would block a hand like jack 10 of diamonds, which I would want him to have here. After a very, very long tank, I decide that I have to see it, and I'll live with it if he has me beat. But after putting some calling chips out, I am told the good news that he was in fact bluffing with king jack, and we are going to scoop this monster $16,000 pot, which puts our stack at nearly $20,000. Even looking back at this hand now, this is just unbelievable. I imagine this will be one of the toughest spots that I'll have to face for a very long time, and rightfully so. Definitely feels very good to come to the right decision in this one.
Kicking at my peers, my influence worth a lot.